My name is Mike Quinn. I'm a managing director here at Kroll. Just a real brief background about myself, and then once Jonathan gets his going, we'll let him introduce himself too. I spent 10 years, almost 10 years with the FBI as a special agent investigating cyber crimes in the Newark, New Jersey division. So I know the area well, Mark. And then had the opportunity to do computer forensics with them, and then moved to headquarters for 2 years in the cyber division. Got to see things from a pretty high level. It was extremely interesting. Jonathan, any luck yet?
And by the way, audience, that's where I met Mike because he arrested me in New Jersey. I had to throw that in there, Mike. Go on.
Unfortunately, that is not true. It would have been for a great story. And then I've joined Kroll about 6.5 years ago. The time has flown, and I absolutely love what I'm doing now. And I help companies get through an incident response, right? So companies get hacked, whatever they call us in, we help them get through, understand what happened, how it happened, and kind of tend to make sure it doesn't happen again. So one of the things that we have seen, and I'm sure you guys have heard about it, it's no surprise to you guys, but the rise of ransomware. And the reason we want to talk about it is because it has not stopped. It's been going on since I left the Bureau. It had started out, and we'll kind of take you through some of this, kind of the evolution of ransomware throughout the years. It has just not stopped. And now we're seeing payments or ransoms being requested in the $50 million range, right? So I want people to consider at the end of this, hey, what is our insurance policy? What does it cover? How much does it cover? Does it cover millions of dollars in payments of ransom? Does it cover the attorney fees, forensic fees like Kroll? Does it cover e-discovery fees, notifications, all of these things that you need to consider? So hopefully with that in mind, we'll take you through kind of the evolution of ransomware, and hopefully you'll understand why, some simple fixes here and there, just check on it and then make sure that we're good to go after this. So Jonathan, if you wouldn't mind.
Hey, Mike, yeah, you want us to start scrolling through, or are you going to take over the presentation?
Yeah, that'd be great. So, yep, this is perfect. So Maze Ransomware is just one of the many ransomware groups that are out there. They kind of started after Ryuk. Ryuk was one of the big ones. But what's important about Maze is the first group that we know of who is actually stealing data from victim environments and then using that to encourage victim companies to pay the ransom. So again, a lot of companies, they did the right thing. They had good backups that were stored offline so that if their data was encrypted, no big deal. We'll just restore from our backups that we have offline. Okay. For those companies that didn't have good backups, right? Obviously, you're out of luck. You're paying the ransom. And for those that have questions, do companies really pay the ransom? Do they actually get the decryption key? Yes, and yes. We can go through those later. But Maze was interesting because they decided, look, if people don't pay the ransom because they have backups, well, then we've got to change something. And the significant change we need to make is to steal their data, because we know that there are regulators out there who will want to know if the company has been breached. So what we'll do to let everyone know that the company has been breached is we're going to create a shaming website on the dark web. And that shaming website will list the name of the companies that we've breached if they don't communicate with us. And then if they still don't pay our ransom, and there is a negotiation process there, if they don't pay our ransom, we're just going to dump all the data that we've taken from them. And to give you an idea, we have had cases with a terabyte of data stolen from our victim companies. So just imagine a terabyte of your data, the most important, sensitive data that you may have, just being dumped to the dark web for everyone to just kind of go through. Well, it was interesting because, this nice note here, they want to come across as, hey, we're just trying to help you out here. We want to show you that your system is unreliable, security is important, you're not taking care of your employees. I call this nonsense. They want to get paid. There's nothing else to this. This is a nice PR statement from somebody that did a good job. It's BS. So ultimately, at the end of the day, they were stealing data, and other ransomware groups took note of this. Well, a lot of press out there identified this, and here's obviously a press release from Maze here. Well, the other press sites picked up on this, and wow, had a field day with it. The very next day, Mark, there was the ransomware groups started going after, specifically Maze, going after vaccine testing facilities, right? So knowing that COVID was going on, if you thought for a moment they weren't going to attack hospitals, companies making vaccines, you are absolutely wrong. right? They absolutely went after them immediately, right? So what makes ransomware successful, right? What does it require? Well, for our attackers, it means, look, they've got to get into your environment first. We'll talk about how that's done in a little bit. Spoiler alert, it's phishing emails, it's faulty VPN appliances that are out of date and not patched. We'll get into that in a little bit. But they want to, once they get into your network, right, they're doing what any attacker would have done previously. They want to gain access immediately to privileged credentials. They then will deploy their reconnaissance tools. You know, if you've ever heard of Metasploit, Cobalt Strike, these are all tools that we find in environments constantly that are capable of doing incredible damage to an environment. So they're stealing credentials. They are then using your data, your environment against you, PSExec, PowerShell, tools that are just common with Windows that they can use to do a little recon on your environment. And then eventually they'll steal your data. For some companies, it's exfiltrated via Cobalt Strike. For other companies, what we're seeing a lot of now is the data is just being sent via web browser to Mega. If you're familiar with Mega Uploads, a gentleman named Kim.com owns Mega. The FBI has been looking at him for years. That's where that data just gets sent now. So gigabytes of data just sent over to Mega, and it gets hosted there on their site, and it's blocked until they decide to release it. Obviously, for that to work, right, you know, they got to get access to your critical systems. There has to be time urgency, right? If we can't get our systems back up online immediately, our company is dead in the water. Well, you're probably paying, right? And then you want to create a lot of fear in your clients to encourage them to pay, right? So protecting against something like this, it is relatively somewhat simple, right? We've got to have good verified backups that we take relatively regularly, right? And that the amount of time that it takes for us to restore, right? If we say we got a full backup from 2 weeks ago, what are we going to do with that position of, okay, well, we've lost 2 weeks of data and 2 weeks of business. What does that mean for us? So maybe we want to create backups more frequently. We want to make sure that we're monitoring our endpoints, right? What does that mean? It means that you have a group of people, whether it's your own SOC, you hire a group like Kroll, whoever, to monitor your endpoints for signs of unauthorized activity or attacker activity, right? Those are the things we're talking about. And we'll get to the ransomware vectors in a moment. Just real quickly, when I was back in the FBI, back at headquarters, before I left, was when the first ransomware really started to rear its head. It was called CryptoLocker. And CryptoLocker was nothing more than a device at the time, I think, if I'm not mixing things up. It was just an application that locked you out of your computer. Typically, it was end users got it. People like me, my grandmother, my mother, whoever, grandfathers, fathers, I don't want to leave the men out of this. They were hit by it because they clicked on an advertisement on a web banner. They got a phishing email that had an attachment. And all it did really was change their password on their account. It didn't encrypt anything. And it would require them to send a payment. Over the years, right, that has changed to a much more formal, not just, well, then it went into just encrypting your data, right, and requesting a payment that way. And then it grew into exfiltrating your data and encrypting your data before leaving your environment, and then setting up shaming sites. So it has changed significantly. Jonathan, how are you doing over there?
Hey. Let's see if I have video. Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you. Perfect timing.
Yeah, had to reroute through the cell phone, so sorry if it's a little bit tinny. But what Mike's been taking you through is the terror of ransomware. But let's talk a little bit about why it's being so effective and some of the things that you need to do going forward in order to protect against it. First, in my view, ransomware became the critical strike issue it has become because of three simple factors. First, our ransomware attackers discovered Tor, a creation of the U.S. Navy, by the way, in order to hide their spies, also became a really effective way to hide web-based traffic from investigation. But that's only part of the deal. You have to be able to get paid without getting caught. And the rise of Bitcoin and its ubiquitous distribution created the monetary underpinnings of the ransomware market. And on top of that, what you started to see is more effective use of crypto tools, full disk encryption. It meant that, frankly, they found us in a weak point. We had shifted in the early, mid-2010s away from backups. We were really focusing on just-in-time delivery and data, and we weren't thinking the way we were in the 80s and 90s around backup systems. And as a result, we got burned because many places got hit, got locked up, and they simply didn't have the capacity to engage in a restoration in the same way that they would have maybe a decade ago. So, of course, we adapted. First, law enforcement became really good at targeting Tor sites, the exit points, etc. We built tools for being able to map and track Bitcoin, splinter payments, and to kind of track data. And the industry responded by really driving home the need to build and focus on backups. So, of course, the attackers then altered their methodologies. So, first, it used to be drive-by. Now it's persistent. They are going into your system. They are spending time there, and they are using tools that allow them to live off the land. They're using the stuff you've already got in your network in order to ensure that they're being able to access you. Second, they're destroying your backups. They are going in and finding where you have them. They are zeroing them out, and they are taking steps to make you think you're backed up, but your data is actually almost non-existent. Third, they're reviewing your finances. They're figuring out exactly what your cash flow is, what you're worth, and they're making sure that that ransomware request is painful enough to make them good profit, but less painful than the loss of the data that they're taking away from you. It is a targeted, cruel, but very effective business tactic. Two things in particular have enabled this, and it's one thing that I love to talk to all the folks here who have a large focus on IT. The lack of, they break in using phishing. They cause a problem, and then they target the admin credentials of IT because they know those credentials are going to work everywhere, that people aren't segregating out passwords, that they're not keeping them at a local level, that they're not using tools like Microsoft Labs because it's a pain in the backside. It makes IT life more difficult, and they take advantage of that. And then it's the IT team's credentials that they're using to move across the network, to turn off the system so that even if someone is watching, it's really hard to tell their traffic from that of regular IT. And when you add in the factor that both Mark and Sean were talking about, the under-resourcing of IT and the globalization of it, IT maintenance at 2 a.m. is no longer uncommon. It very well could be the team from the Philippines or the team from India coming in to do some of the groundwork. So as a result, the attackers are able to hide in plain sight. But we focused a lot on phishing. Practically everyone here has had a phishing campaign targeted at them, and they've gotten that training, that really boring training that you've all sat through that IT has now made you do. So yet again, they have adapted. And here are the three things that I really want you guys to focus on today. Now, it'll change in a few months, but for today, watch out for DocuSign. Those things have become incredibly common. We're all so used to signing them now. It's so easy. It's now joined the fake FedEx notice, the fake Dropbox request as a primary target method of phishing to get you to enter credentials so that you can sign that document, that contract, that information set. And by the way, where it's often coming from is a colleague. They hack one account and then target that account to go across the network so that you're getting something from someone you expect and it's couched in the language you expect. Why? Because they've read your colleague's email. They know the business deals. They know the information when they send you the credentials that they need. Second big thing, they are targeting VPNs. Now, they've been doing that for years, particularly the intelligence services, but because they're sharing information, these targeted attacks to VPNs have resulted in credential theft that they haven't used. They're icing it. They're keeping it for a few months. because they know what you're going to do is patch and think you're secure. And even if you're using multi-factor authentication, unless you're really segregating that out, that MFA seed database, well, it's directly connected to the VPN appliance, isn't it? So I can, once I'm on that appliance, hop off, collect the seeds, and create my very own multi-factor authentication generator. And last but not least, because we're not using 15-character passwords, and that's difficult for people to remember, they're engaging in wholesale data mining to target our home users and our end users to get collections of data set there. So hopefully, Mike and I have done our job properly. We have thoroughly terrified you at this point. Let's talk about how bad it can get to add it to that next level. All of these put together are now moving away from the quick hit ransom attack that collected 30 to 100 grand into a modern attack that's going after something truly valuable, like a SCADA system that controls something of significant value. The same methodology of attack is coming into play. Spear phishing, credential theft, watering holes, all the stuff you're used to. When they're on site, they're using the same methodologies I talked about, credential shuffling, vulnerability hunting, they're targeting your Active Directory, they're dumping creds, and they're spending time to learn. Why? They need to figure out where the DMZ between the network and the ICS and supervisory control systems are. They need to figure out who can traverse them and attack and control those credentials. This is the new methodology. Ransomware is the last piece of this type of attack. After they've identified the systems, altered or changed info, collected what they need, the ransom is the icing on the cake because it achieves two effects. It has a huge disruptive focus, and it also really wipes out a tremendous amount of forensic evidence to hide their tracks. So this really comes back to almost a older school form of physical security and the need to really architect from the ground up how we're going to approach protecting these particular systems, because credential limitations are simply only as effective as the security of the design itself. Right. Jens, the regulators have started to get involved too. In the past 3 months, OFAC, FinCEN, and US DOJ have all issued detailed bulletins around ransomware and ransomware payments. Let me just toss out some of the truly fun stuff. If you make a ransomware payment to a sanctioned entity or individual, your company is strictly liable for that. You have an OFAC violation, you know, like if you're doing business with Iran kind of violation. But how do you know? Well, guess what? Whether you knew or not, whether you intended or not, it's a strict liability issue. And as Mike was talking to you about, groups like Maze, groups like Sodebeki are directly connected with intelligence services and sanctioned entities. So paying a ransom is a roll of the dice now, and I think it's being done deliberately. The goal here is to place pressure to stop the flow of the payment, to make it so that maybe data destruction and the consequential business damage is enough. Oh, but there's an out here, folks. And one very important thing I want you to realize. If you call the Bureau, OFAC takes that into account for any sanction payment. If you connect with law enforcement, you get protection. So reporting and connecting about a ransom attack is becoming even more critical, even if it seems that there's very little that they can immediately do. Now, on top of that, you got FinCEN. Now, many of the folks here architect for FinCEN or for groups that have direct control of that. Well, now, if you're facilitating the payment of a ransom, that's a SARS reportable act, and it might require both notice reporting and the appropriate registration around a SARS report set. That's the registration data for a financial institution, the most difficult regulatory environment we have. And on top of that, US DOJ has now issued guidance around purchasing data from illicit sources and whether it in and of itself can be considered to be a crime. So what we're seeing here is a clear government regulatory scrutiny around the payment of ransom, with the goal being involve the government, or run the risk of significant penalty for trying to manage it yourself. All right, so we've fully terrified you. We're now going to go through what you need to focus on. God, I can't stress this enough. Back up, and test them. This is old school IT. Everyone here knows how to do it. And the reason why we don't is it's resource intensive, it's really boring, and it's a tedious job. You know what? Make it the job for the new guy who comes in. Just get it done and validate the systems. You've really got to go back to a restrictive approach. I know there's been so much focus on availability and scalability and ensuring access, but IT needs to push back by requiring business units to identify the business purpose for applications and use rather than just allowing them. The problem becomes is that while there's a tremendous amount of pressure from marketing and sales to allow for access to certain types of systems, they're not the ones spending 3 weekends in a row sleeping in the data center trying to get things restored. And they're not the ones who get called up in front of the board around the access set. Restrict access, focus on whitelisting, and segmentation is really critical. It can save you. Only a part of the boat sinks when you get a bad ransomware attack. And again, no shared admin creds, none. And make sure that the IT team is regularly changing their passwords. Patching. This is something we all know, but there's 2 areas in patching that I really want you to focus on. Multi-factor authentication and VPN vulnerabilities need to be treated as urgent patch issues. And when you have a vulnerability that affects your VPN, if you are unable to conclusively, due to network traffic pattern match, identify that it hasn't been accessed, you need to change passwords for admin and process accounts. Because if your passwords have been scraped, they might not get immediately used. A vulnerability to the VPN is a key changing event. Hardening guides. Again, there are some fantastic ones out there that are completely free. We at Kroll love the CIS benchmarks, but you have to continuously update those hardening guides and ensure that your gold patches are appropriately built for the structure. And hierarchies. I can tell from a lot of the folks involved here that I've got some true Unix heads here. It's time to go back to a strict hierarchy for user permission and data access. It's really time to push back and ensure that, in particularly administrative access and system process accounts are tightly controlled and validated. And let's physically and logically separate networks from different organizational units. Let's ensure that one group that might have some exposure can't take down everything else just because of a desire for a relatively small shared resource benefit. Finally, engage in endpoint and network monitoring. This is something that can really help you find those threats when they're starting and ensure that they get properly addressed going forward. There's a lot to this. It's another whole presentation set, but it's a great thing to do a little reading on, particularly as you're looking at architect structure and understand that the use of sensors and endpoint data can really give you the information that you need to be able to identify threats early and block them from becoming significant realities. Plan and, do the fire drill, folks. That wonderful, wonderful data map and incident response plan, please print it out. Please keep it in a physical printed folder. I've had conversations with folks saying, we have a world-class data map. It's in the system that's been encrypted.
Or, Jonathan, just store it on your phone, right? Like, you have your phone with you everywhere you go. Just have your incident response plan available to you. Put it on Office 365, whatever it is that you might use that you can get in the cloud that is not connected to the network, right? Make it accessible, that's all.
Exactly.
And there's a great CISA guide for going over and really hardening systems on ransomware. It's free. It's some of the best work I've seen the government do in a while in this area. Download it and have a read. And again, if there's anything we can ever do, we're happy to help.